Her true story from Texas. Old woman broken heart. 5 years ago, my son kicked me out of the house with $50. Now he wants to live in my new penthouse. The thunder outside matched the storm in my chest. I walked to the guest room, my room, and started throwing clothes into the old suitcase Tom and I used for our honeymoon. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely zip it closed. Have you ever felt your world collapse in slow motion? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. 5 years ago, my own son handed me a crumpled $50 bill and told me I was on my own. Tonight, he's at my penthouse door begging me to take him in. The same hands that once threw me into the Texas rain are now shaking as they knock on my glass door. But what he doesn't know is that the homeless woman he abandoned became the landlord who now owns his apartment building. Have you ever been thrown away by the person you sacrificed everything for? Have you ever trusted family only to have them destroy your world when you needed them most? Tonight, I'm facing the man who crushed my heart, and he has no idea I hold all the cards. Should I open that door, or let him feel what abandonment truly costs? Stick with me because this story will change how you see family, forgiveness, and the power of reinventing yourself. Follow along as we uncover a truth that's been 5 years in the making. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The rain was coming down like bullets that night in Dallas, but nothing hurt more than my son's words, "Mom, you're done here." I still remember every detail of that living room. The brown couch where I used to rock Michael to sleep when he was little. The coffee table his father built with his own hands before cancer took him. The family photos on the mantel that suddenly felt like lies. Michael stood there in his work clothes, oil stains on his shirt, his face harder than I'd ever seen it. Behind him, his wife Jennifer held baby Emma, my granddaughter, like she was protecting her from something dangerous. That something was me. You heard me, Mom. Pack your stuff. We need this room for Emma. My heart was beating so fast I thought it might explode. This was the house I helped them buy. I'd given them my life savings, every penny from your father's insurance money, to make the down payment. I'd cleaned, cooked, and watched Emma while they worked. This was my home too. Michael, honey, where am I supposed to go? His eyes went cold. The same brown eyes I used to kiss goodnight. That's not my problem anymore. Have you ever felt your world collapse in slow motion? That's what happened to me right there in that cramped living room. The walls felt like they were closing in, and Emma's soft crying in the background sounded like my heart breaking. I thought about the nights I spent in that house, lying in the guest bedroom that used to be Michael's childhood room. Sometimes, when sleep wouldn't come, I'd remember the passionate nights I shared with his father in the master bedroom down the hall. Tom's strong hands pulling me close, whispering how much he loved me, promising we'd grow old together. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was growing old, just not the way we planned. Jennifer, please, I turned to my daughter-in-law. I helped raise Emma. I love that little girl. Jennifer wouldn't even look at me. She just bounced Emma and said, "We've made our decision." The thunder outside matched the storm in my chest. I walked to the guest room, my room, and started throwing clothes into the old suitcase Tom and I used for our honeymoon. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely zip it closed. When I came back to the living room, Michael was standing by the door with something in his hand. He held out a crumpled $50 bill like he was feeding a dog. "Here. This should hold you over." I stared at that money. $50. For 27 years of loving this boy. For giving up my own dreams to help him achieve his. For every scraped knee I kissed, every nightmare I chased away, every sacrifice I made without thinking twice. I took the money because I didn't know what else to do. The door slammed behind me, and I was standing in the rain with a suitcase and $50 to my name. But as I walked away from that house, something happened that surprised me. Instead of feeling defeated, I felt angry. And that anger? It was about to become my greatest weapon. As I stepped into that storm with my suitcase, I made a promise, one that would change everything. I promised myself that someday, Michael would need me more than I had ever needed him. Comment below and tell me, have you ever been betrayed by someone you'd die for? Because this is just the beginning of my story. That first night, I counted those $50 17 times. I was sitting in a 24-hour diner called Mel's, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The waitress kept giving me looks, but I had nowhere else to go. Outside, Dallas was sleeping peacefully while I was trying to figure out how to survive. The diner smelled like grease and broken dreams. There were truckers at the counter, a few night shift workers grabbing late dinner, and me, a 62-year-old woman who just learned that family isn't always blood. I spread the $50 bill on the sticky table and did the math. A cheap motel room would cost at least $40. That left $10 for food. $10 to figure out the rest of my life. You okay, honey? I looked up to see a man about my age behind the counter. His name tag said Carlos, and his eyes were kind. Really kind. The type of eyes that saw through your walls and made you remember you were still a woman, not just a discarded mother. I've been better, I said, trying to smile. Carlos poured fresh coffee into my cup without asking. His fingers brushed mine when he set it down, and for a second, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Alive. Noticed. Wanted. This one's on the house, he said, and his smile made warmth spread through my chest. That's when Rosa appeared. She slid into the booth across from me like she belonged there. Rosa was maybe 50, with tired eyes but strong shoulders. Her clothes were clean but worn, and she had the look of someone who'd survived things that would break other people. First night? She asked, nodding toward my suitcase. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Family? I nodded again. Rosa sighed and stirred sugar into her coffee. Mine was a husband. Came home to find the locks changed and my stuff on the lawn. 15 years of marriage, gone like that. We sat in silence for a while, two women who'd been thrown away by people who were supposed to love us forever. There's a shelter about 10 minutes from here, Rosa finally said. It's not perfect, but it's safe. And honey, if you're going to survive this, you need to be safe first. Something about Rosa made me trust her immediately. Maybe it was the way she didn't pity me. Maybe it was how she treated this conversation like we were planning a business meeting, not discussing my homelessness. Carlos kept refilling our coffee cups, and each time he came over, he'd find an excuse to touch my hand or shoulder. It had been so long since a man looked at me like I mattered. Not as Michael's mother or Tom's wife, but as me. A woman with her own worth. What did you do before? Rosa asked. For work? I was a teacher. Elementary school. But I retired early to help with my granddaughter. Rosa's eyes lit up. You're educated. That's good. That's really good. She leaned forward, and I caught a glimpse of fire in her eyes. The same fire I was starting to feel in my own chest. Listen to me carefully, she said. This is not your ending. This is your beginning. But you have to choose to fight. At 3 a.m, Carlos walked us to Rosa's beat-up Honda. Before I got in, he handed me a napkin with his phone number written on it. For when you're ready to remember you're more than what they said you were, he whispered. His words hit me harder than Michael's rejection had. Because he saw something in me that I'd forgotten existed. Rosa drove through empty Dallas streets while I watched the city I'd lived in my whole life look completely different. When you have nowhere to go, even familiar places become foreign. The shelter's not bad, Rosa said as we pulled into a parking lot. But it's temporary. We're going to get you out of there fast. I stared at the building. It looked like every nightmare you imagine when you think about being homeless. But Rosa was right, it was safe. And safe was more than I'd had a few hours ago. As we walked toward the entrance, Rosa stopped and grabbed my arm. Promise me something, she said. Promise me you won't let them break you. Promise me you'll remember that this is temporary. I looked at this woman who just met me and was already fighting for my future. I thought about Carlos's kind eyes and gentle touches. I thought about the $50 in my pocket and how it represented both my lowest point and my starting point. Rosa whispered something that night that would become my battle cry: they threw you away because they were afraid of what you might become. Standing there in that parking lot, I realized she was right. Michael hadn't thrown me out because I was useless. He'd thrown me out because somewhere deep down, he knew I was capable of more than he could handle. What would you do with $50 and nowhere to go? Because I was about to turn mine into something nobody saw coming. The shelter smelled like disinfectant trying to mask decades of desperation. My bed was a narrow cot in a room with 12 other women. Some snored, some cried quietly, and some stared at the ceiling like they were trying to solve the mystery of how they got there. I was definitely in that last group. But Rosa was right, it was safe. And after sleeping under highway overpasses for 2 nights before finding this place, safe felt like luxury. The rules were strict: lights out at 10, up at 6, no personal belongings left unattended, and absolutely no men in the women's section. That last rule made me think about Carlos and the napkin with his number that I kept hidden in my shoe. On my 3rd morning, I was folding my few clothes when a voice behind me said, "You don't belong here." I turned to see a man in khakis and a polo shirt, holding a clipboard. He was maybe 45, with graying hair and the kind of face that looked like he'd lived a full life but hadn't let it make him bitter. This was David. "Excuse me?" I said. "I mean that in the best way possible," he smiled. "I'm David Chen, volunteer coordinator. I've been watching you help the other women, organizing their paperwork, reading letters to those who can't. You have skills this place needs." David had divorced eyes. I recognized them because I'd seen them in my mirror for years after Tom died. They were eyes that had loved deeply and lost badly, but hadn't given up hope completely. "What kind of skills?" I asked. "Teaching skills. Organization skills. Leadership skills." He sat down on the edge of my cot, closer than he needed to. "We have a job training program starting next week. Real estate certification. It's a 6-month program, and if you complete it, we help you find work." Real estate. I'd never thought about it, but something about the idea excited me. Maybe because it involved helping people find homes, and I knew what it felt like to need one desperately. "What's the catch?" I asked. David laughed. "Smart woman. The catch is it's competitive. 30 people apply, we take 10. You have to want it badly enough to fight for it." I looked around the shelter. At Rosa organizing a job search group in the corner. At Maria, the teenager who'd aged out of foster care, practicing interview questions. At Janet, whose husband had emptied their bank accounts before disappearing. These women were fighting every day just to survive. But I wanted more than survival. I wanted to thrive. "I want it," I said. David's smile was different then. Warmer. More personal. "Good. Because I think you've got what it takes." That evening, I was in the common area filling out application paperwork when trouble walked in. His name was Ray, and he'd been bothering the younger women since I arrived. Rosa had warned me about him. He was dating one of the male volunteers and thought that gave him free run of the place. Well, Ray said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Look at Grandma trying to play businesswoman." I looked up from my application. Ray was the kind of man who'd probably been attractive once but had let meanness rot him from the inside out. He smelled like cheap cologne and entitlement. "I'm trying to work," I said politely. "Real estate?" He grabbed my application and read it mockingly. "Lady, you're pushing 70 and living in a homeless shelter. Who's going to trust you to sell them a house?" The common room went quiet. Everyone was watching to see how I'd handle this. I stood up slowly, walked around the table, and got close enough to Ray that he had to look up at me. Close enough that I could smell his fear underneath that cheap cologne. "Let me tell you something, Ray," I said quietly. I raised a son, buried a husband, and survived being thrown away by my own family. You think some small-time bully is going to scare me? I took my application back from his hands. I'm going to get my license. I'm going to sell houses. And someday, when you're still hanging around shelters trying to feel important, I'll be helping families build the lives you're too weak to create for yourself. Ray's face went red, but he didn't say another word. He just slunk away while the room erupted in quiet applause. David appeared beside me. That was impressive, he said. That was necessary, I replied. Later that night, after lights out, I lay in my cot thinking about David's hands as he'd explained the real estate program. The way he'd touched my shoulder when he said he believed in me. The way he'd looked at me like I was capable of anything. It had been so long since a man saw me as more than somebody's mother or widow. David saw potential. He saw a woman worth investing in. Rosa's cot was next to mine, and she whispered in the dark, "You know he likes you." Who? David. The way he looks at you isn't the way volunteers usually look at residents. I thought about Tom, about the passion we'd shared, about how good it felt to be desired. About Carlos at the diner and his gentle touches. About David's smile when I said I wanted the real estate program. Maybe Rosa was right. Maybe I was ready to remember I was more than just a discarded mother. The application asked one question that made my hands shake. What do you hope to accomplish in the next 5 years? I stared at that blank line for a long time. Then I wrote, everything they said I couldn't. Have you ever had to start completely over? Because I was about to learn that sometimes the best foundations are built on solid rock bottom. The real estate classroom smelled like fresh coffee and possibility. I was one of 10 people chosen for the program, and I'd never been more grateful to be somewhere in my life. The desks were arranged in a circle, and for the first time since leaving Michael's house, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Our instructor was a sharp woman named Patricia who wore power suits and spoke like she could sell ice to penguins. But it was David who made my heart race every time he walked into that room. He'd volunteered to help with the evening study sessions, and that's where things got interesting. Real estate is about more than selling houses, Patricia announced on the first day. It's about understanding what people really need. Security. Investment. A place to call home. She looked directly at me when she said that last part, and I felt it deep in my chest. I knew exactly what it meant to need a place to call home. The other students were a mixed group. There was James, a former mechanic whose shop had gone under. Linda, a divorced teacher like me. Marcus, a 20-something kid who'd grown up in foster care. And Sarah, wait, I can't use that name. Let me call her Susan, a single mom trying to build something better for her daughter. But every evening, when the formal class ended, David would stay behind to help with the harder concepts. That's when magic happened. You're struggling with property law, he said one night, sliding his chair closer to mine. Close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made my pulse quicken. It's a lot to remember, I admitted. David opened the textbook between us, and his hand brushed mine as he pointed to a paragraph. The touch sent electricity up my arm, and from the way he paused, I knew he felt it too. Let me explain it differently, he said, his voice softer than it had been all evening. As he talked about contracts and contingencies, I found myself watching his mouth more than listening to his words. It had been so long since I'd felt this kind of attraction. Not just physical, though there was definitely that. But intellectual attraction. The excitement of being seen as smart and capable by someone I respected. You're not just learning this, David said suddenly. You're mastering it. Do you realize how rare that is? I looked into his eyes and saw something that made my stomach flutter. Admiration. Desire. The look of a man who was trying very hard to maintain professional boundaries and failing. David, I started to say, but he interrupted me. I know this is complicated. The professional relationship, the fact that you're technically still a shelter resident. But I need you to know, you're extraordinary. The classroom felt smaller suddenly. More intimate. Like we were the only 2 people in the world who understood what it meant to rebuild your life from nothing. I haven't felt like this in a long time, I whispered. Felt like what? Like a woman. Not somebody's mother or widow or charity case. Just a woman. David's hand covered mine on the desk. His fingers were warm and strong, and when he squeezed gently, I felt something wake up inside me that I thought had died with Tom. You are a woman, he said. A brilliant, strong, beautiful woman. And anyone who threw you away is an idiot. We sat there in the empty classroom, holding hands across textbooks and legal documents, and I felt more alive than I had in years. The other students had started to notice our connection too. During group study sessions, they'd tease us about being study partners, but it was good-natured. Everyone was rooting for everyone else in this program. We all knew what it meant to get a second chance. Marcus, the foster kid, was particularly sweet about it. Miss Rose, he'd say, Mr. David sure does find a lot of reasons to explain things to you. Linda, the divorce teacher, was more direct. Honey, that man is smitten. And from where I'm sitting, the feeling looks mutual. But it was during our late-night study sessions that things really heated up. One evening, we were alone in the classroom reviewing contract terms when David stood up to write something on the whiteboard. I was watching him move, admiring the way his shoulders filled out his shirt, when he caught me staring. What? He asked, smiling. Nothing, I said, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. Rose. He set down the marker and walked back to where I was sitting. What were you thinking just then? I looked up at him, this man who saw potential in me when I could barely see it in myself. This man who made me remember I had desires beyond just survival. I was thinking about how long it's been since someone looked at me the way you do. David's eyes darkened. How do I look at you? Like you want me. The air between us crackled with tension. David sat on the edge of the desk, close enough that I could feel the warmth from his body. I do want you, he said quietly. But I want to do this right. I want to be sure you're choosing me, not just choosing not to be alone. His honesty made my heart race even faster. This wasn't just physical attraction, this was a man who respected me enough to make sure I knew my own mind. David, I said, standing up so we were face to face. I haven't made a choice just for me in 27 years. Every decision was about Michael, or Tom, or what was expected of me. But this is my choice. He searched my eyes for a long moment, then slowly reached up to touch my face. His thumb traced my cheekbone, and I leaned into the touch like a flower turning towards sunlight. The night before my exam, David made an offer that could change everything, is what I should tell you. But what really happened was simpler and more powerful than any offer. He kissed me. It was gentle at first, tentative, like he was asking permission. But when I kissed him back, when I let myself melt into this moment of pure want and possibility, it became something deeper. Something that reminded me I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. When we finally broke apart, David rested his forehead against mine. Whatever happens tomorrow on that exam, he said, you're going to be incredible. When did you last surprise yourself with what you could achieve? Because I was about to find out that sometimes the best things happen when you stop playing it safe and start playing to win. I passed that real estate exam with the highest score in the class. When Patricia handed me that certificate, my hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. 93%. The foster kid Marcus got 87 and was jumping around like he'd won the lottery. Linda scored 82 and started crying happy tears. But 93%? I stared at that number like it was written in a foreign language. Congratulations, Rose, Patricia said, and for the first time since I'd known her, she was smiling. That's the highest score I've seen in 3 years of teaching this program. David was standing in the back of the room, and when our eyes met, his whole face lit up. Not the polite smile of a volunteer congratulating a student. The proud, intimate smile of a man watching the woman he cared about achieve something incredible. After the ceremony, David walked me to his car. We were going to celebrate, dinner at a real restaurant, not the diner where I'd been eating discount meals for months. I'm so proud of you, he said as he opened my door. His hand lingered on my back longer than necessary, and I felt that familiar electricity between us. The restaurant was nicer than anywhere I'd been since Tom died. White tablecloths, actual wine glasses, the kind of place where people went for anniversaries and proposals. I felt out of place in my thrift store dress, but David looked at me like I was wearing diamonds. "You know what this means, right?" he said after we'd ordered. "That I can legally sell houses? That you can rebuild your entire life." He reached across the table and took my hand. His fingers were warm, and when he rubbed his thumb across my knuckles, I felt desire pool low in my stomach. "Rose, you're about to be independent. Completely independent. Do you understand how powerful that is?" I looked at this man who'd believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. 6 months ago, I was sleeping on a cot in a homeless shelter. Tonight, I was having dinner with a successful architect who looked at me like I hung the moon. "I want to ask you something," David said, his voice getting serious. "And I need you to be completely honest." My heart started beating faster. "Okay. When you look at me, what do you see?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean? Do you see someone who helped you when you were desperate? Someone you feel obligated to? Or do you see someone you actually want to be with?" I understood why he was asking. Our whole relationship had started when I was at my lowest point. He'd been in a position of power, volunteer coordinator, teacher, helper, and I'd been vulnerable, needy, broken. "David," I said, squeezing his hand. "6 months ago, you saw potential in me when I couldn't see it in myself. But tonight? Tonight I see potential in us." His eyes got that dark, intense look that made my pulse quicken. "Because I need you to know," I continued, "this isn't gratitude. This isn't me clinging to the first man who was kind to me. This is me choosing you because you make me feel alive." David signaled for the check, and his voice was rough when he said, "Let's get out of here." The drive back to his apartment was charged with anticipation. I'd been living in transitional housing since graduating from the shelter program, but David's place was where I'd been spending most of my evenings. Studying, talking, slowly falling in love with a man who saw me as his equal. His apartment was on the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse, with exposed brick walls and tall windows that looked out over downtown Dallas. It was sophisticated and masculine, the home of a man who'd built something solid for himself. "Rose," David said as soon as we were through the door. I turned to face him, and the look in his eyes made my breath catch. This wasn't the gentle, respectful desire we'd been dancing around for months. This was raw want, and it was directed entirely at me. "I've been waiting for this moment," he said, stepping closer. "Waiting for you to be ready. Waiting for this to be right." I reached up and touched his face, feeling the slight roughness of his 5 o'clock shadow. "I'm ready." When David kissed me this time, there was nothing tentative about it. His hands tangled in my hair, pulling me closer, and I melted into him like I was coming home. We made love on his couch with the city lights twinkling through the windows, and for the first time since Tom died, I felt completely, thoroughly desired. Afterward, lying in David's arms, I realized something that shocked me. I wasn't thinking about Tom. I wasn't comparing this to my marriage or feeling guilty about moving on. I was just present, in this moment, with this man who loved me exactly as I was. "What happens now?" I whispered against his chest. "Now you start your new life," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. "And if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of it." The next morning, David helped me apartment hunt. After months of transitional housing and shelters, the idea of having my own space again felt almost too good to be true. "This one," he said as we walked into a 1-bedroom apartment in a complex near downtown. It had a small kitchen, a living room with good light, and a bedroom that faced east so I'd wake up with the sunrise. "David, it's perfect, but I haven't even gotten a job yet. I can't afford." "The security deposit is a loan," he interrupted. "From me to you. You'll pay me back when you start selling houses." I looked at this man who'd already given me so much. Confidence, skills, love, and now he was offering to help me take the final step into independence. Why? I asked. Why are you doing all this for me? David pulled me into his arms right there in the empty apartment. Because 6 months ago, I met a woman who'd been thrown away by her family. She was broken and angry and scared. But she was also brilliant and strong and beautiful. And I fell in love with her. He paused, looking into my eyes. But the woman standing here today? She's not broken anymore. She's powerful. And I'm not helping her out of pity. I'm investing in our future. That afternoon, I signed the lease on my first apartment in over 30 years. My name on the contract, my responsibility, my home. But finding an apartment was the easy part. Finding a real estate agency that would hire someone with no experience and a recent homeless stint? That was going to be the real challenge. I must have walked into 20 different offices that week. The responses were all variations of the same theme: we're not hiring right now. You need more experience. Maybe try somewhere smaller. What they meant was, you're too old. You look desperate. We don't hire people like you. By Friday afternoon, I was starting to lose hope. David kept telling me to be patient, that the right opportunity would come, but I was running out of agencies to try. That's when I found Maria's office. It was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a Chinese restaurant. The sign said, Estrella Real Estate, and through the window, I could see a tiny office with 2 desks and fake plants that had seen better days. Maria Estrella was maybe 55, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that had seen their share of struggles. When I walked in, she was on the phone speaking rapid Spanish, gesturing with her free hand like she was conducting an orchestra. She hung up and looked at me with the direct gaze of someone who didn't have time for nonsense. You're looking for work, she said. It wasn't a question. How did you know? Because nobody walks into a real estate office at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon unless they need something badly. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. Sit. Tell me why I should hire you. I liked her immediately. No fake friendliness, no judgment, just straight talk. I just got my license. I don't have experience selling houses, but I have experience rebuilding my life from nothing. And I think that's exactly what your clients need, someone who understands what it means to start over. Maria leaned back in her chair and studied me for a long moment. You been homeless? She asked bluntly. Yes. Recently? 6 months ago. Kids throw you out? I was starting to see why Maria's office was small but busy. She had a gift for cutting straight to the truth. My son threw me out with $50 and told me I was on my own. Maria nodded like this was the most normal thing in the world. My first husband did the same thing. 20 years of marriage, and he decided he wanted to start fresh with his secretary. She shrugged. That was 15 years ago. Now I own 3 rental properties and this business. Funny how life works. So you'll give me a chance? I'll give you a chance to prove yourself. You get leads through me, we split the commission 60-40 until you bring in your own clients. Then we renegotiate. She pulled out a contract and slid it across the desk. But understand something, I don't do charity. You succeed because you work hard, not because I feel sorry for you. I don't want charity, I said, scanning the contract. I want opportunity. Good. Because your first client is coming in Monday morning. Desperate seller, house has been on the market for 8 months with another agency. She's ready to try something different. My heart started racing. My first client. My first chance to prove that all this work, all this rebuilding, had been worth it. What's the property? I asked. Maria smiled for the first time since I'd walked in. 3-bedroom ranch in the suburbs. Needs work, but good bones. Reminds me of the kind of house someone might build dreams in, then have those dreams destroyed. The house I was showing looked exactly like the one Michael threw me out of. As I drove to meet my first client, I realized that everything The heartbreak, the homelessness, the shelter, the classes, falling in love with David, had been leading to this moment. I was about to start the career that would change everything. What's the best comeback moment you've ever had? Because mine was just getting started. The house at 412 Maple Street broke my heart and filled me with rage at the same time. It was exactly like the house Michael had thrown me out of. Same brick exterior, same small front porch, same layout inside. Even the kitchen had the same yellow cabinets that I'd painted by hand in my old life. My client was Rebecca Martinez, a single mother whose ex-husband had walked out and left her with a mortgage she couldn't afford. She met me at the front door with red-rimmed eyes and two little girls hiding behind her legs. "I don't know why this house won't sell," Rebecca said as we walked through the living room. "The other agent said it was priced right, but we haven't had a single offer in 8 months." I knew exactly why it wasn't selling. The house felt abandoned, even with Rebecca still living in it. The walls were bare because she'd packed away anything personal, trying to make it show better. The rooms echoed because she'd already sold most of the furniture to pay bills. It looked like a house where dreams had died. "Rebecca," I said gently, "can we sit down for a minute?" We sat at her kitchen table while her daughters played in the backyard. I could see the desperation in Rebecca's eyes, the same desperation I'd felt 6 months ago when my whole world collapsed. "Tell me what happened," I said. "My husband left us for his coworker. Cleaned out our savings, stopped paying the mortgage, and disappeared. I've been trying to keep up with the payments, but I can't afford this place on my salary alone." Rebecca worked as a nurse at the local hospital. Good job, decent money, but not enough to cover a mortgage payment that had been based on 2 incomes. "The other agent told me I was being too emotional about the house," Rebecca continued. "That I needed to treat it like a business transaction." I felt anger rise in my chest. "That's terrible advice." "What?" "Rebecca, this isn't just a business transaction. This is your life. Your daughter's childhood home. Your sanctuary that turned into a prison." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Any agent who doesn't understand that doesn't deserve your business." For the first time since I'd arrived, Rebecca really looked at me. "You've been through something like this." "Worse, actually. But that's not important right now. What's important is getting you and your girls into a better situation." I spent the next hour walking through that house with fresh eyes. Not the eyes of an agent trying to make a quick sale, but the eyes of a woman who understood what it meant to lose everything and need to start over. The problem wasn't the house. The house was solid, well-maintained, in a good neighborhood with excellent schools. The problem was how it was being presented. "Rebecca, I need you to trust me on something. Can you do that?" She nodded. "I want you to put some of your personal things back. Not everything, but enough to make this place feel like a home instead of a museum. And I want to price it $15,000 below market value." "But won't I lose money?" "You'll lose more money sitting on the market for another 8 months. And more importantly, you'll keep losing pieces of your sanity." I knew this strategy would work because I understood what buyers really wanted. They didn't want perfection, they wanted possibility. They wanted to walk into a house and imagine their own life there. Within 2 days of implementing my changes, we had 3 showings scheduled. The first showing was a young couple with a baby. They walked through politely but didn't seem excited. The second was a family relocating from out of state. They liked the house but wanted to think about it. The third showing changed everything. It was a single father named James with a 7-year-old son. The minute they walked in, I could see something shift in James's face. His son ran straight to the backyard and started playing on the swing set Rebecca had left behind. "This feels right," James said, watching his son through the kitchen window. "It's a good house for raising children," I said. "The previous owner loved it here." James made an offer that afternoon. Not full price, but close enough that Rebecca started crying when I called her. "You did it," she whispered through the phone. "You actually did it." The closing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Rebecca hugged me so tight I thought she might crack my ribs. You didn't just sell my house, she said. You gave me my life back. That commission check, my first commission check, was for $4,200. More money than I'd had in my hands since Tom's insurance settlement. But more than the money, it was proof. Proof that I could do this. Proof that starting over at 62 wasn't just possible, it was profitable. David took me out to celebrate that night. Not the same restaurant where we'd celebrated my license, but somewhere even nicer. The kind of place where successful people went to mark important moments. I'm so proud of you, he said, raising his wine glass. To Rose Martinez, real estate agent and miracle worker. Martinez? I laughed. Where did that come from? Rebecca's last name. She told everyone at the hospital about the agent who understood her situation and made miracles happen. Apparently, she's been recommending you to everyone she knows. That's when I realized something incredible was happening. Word was spreading about the agent who specialized in helping people rebuild their lives. Within a week, I had 3 new clients, all referrals from Rebecca. There was Linda, a teacher going through a messy divorce who needed to sell quickly. Carlos, the same Carlos from the diner where I'd spent my first night, who wanted to buy his first house after years of renting. And Patricia, a widow downsizing after her husband's death. Each client brought their own heartbreak, their own hopes, their own need for someone who understood that buying or selling a house was never just about the property. It was about life transitions, new beginnings, and the courage to move forward. But it was helping Carlos that brought everything full circle. I remember you, he said when he walked into Maria's office. The lady from the diner. The one with the kind eyes and the broken heart. I hardly recognized him in his work clothes instead of a restaurant uniform. He looked successful, confident, nothing like the night shift worker who'd given me free coffee when I had nowhere to go. You remembered me, I said. Hard to forget someone who looked that lost and still said please and thank you. Most people don't have manners when they're desperate. He smiled. But you look different now. Stronger. I am stronger. Good. Because I need someone strong to help me buy my first house. I've been saving for 15 years, and I finally have enough for a down payment. Working with Carlos felt like closing a circle. Here was a man who'd shown me kindness when I was at my lowest, and now I could help him achieve one of his biggest dreams. We found him a perfect little house near the diner where he still worked part-time, even though his day job at a construction company paid better. The house needed some work, but Carlos was handy and excited about the project. This is it, he said, standing in the empty living room. This is where I start my real life. Watching Carlos get the keys to his first house, I realized I was building more than just a career. I was building a reputation as the agent who understood that real estate was about hope, not just property. That night, David and I were looking at apartments for me to move into. After months of transitional housing, I was finally ready for a real home again. This one, David said as we walked into a one-bedroom apartment with hardwood floors and big windows. It was in a complex downtown, walking distance to Maria's office, close enough to David's place that we could see each other easily. It's perfect, I said, then stopped. David, can I ask you something? Anything. Are you helping me apartment hunt because you want me to have my own space, or because you want us to take the next step together? David was quiet for a moment, looking out the big windows at the city lights. Honestly? Both. I want you to have your own space because you need to know you can take care of yourself. But I also want us to build something together. What kind of something? He turned to face me, and the look in his eyes was intense and serious. The kind of something that lasts. The kind that survives challenges and grows stronger. The kind your first marriage was before you lost your husband. I felt my heart skip a beat. David wasn't just talking about dating or living together. He was talking about forever. David, I said softly. I know it's soon. I know we've only been together a few months. But Rose, I'm 46 years old. I've been married before, I've dated plenty of women, and I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. He stepped closer, taking my hands in his. You're not just surviving anymore. You're thriving. And I want to build a life with the woman you've become. Standing in that empty apartment, with the man I'd fallen in love with talking about our future together, I realized something amazing. 6 months ago, Michael had thrown me away because he thought I was useless. Tonight, a successful, kind, intelligent man was asking to build a life with me because he saw my worth. The house I was showing looked exactly like the one Michael threw me out of. But the life I was building looked nothing like the one he destroyed. What does having your own space mean to you? Because I was about to find out that sometimes home isn't a place, it's a person who sees your value and helps you build something beautiful. I found the letter wedged behind my mail slot like a guilty secret trying to hide. 3 months into my new apartment, my own space, my growing real estate career, and this envelope with my son's handwriting shows up to remind me that some ghosts refuse to stay buried. The return address was still the house I'd helped him buy. The house he'd thrown me out of with $50 and a broken heart. My hands were shaking as I tore it open. Mom, I know I have no right to contact you, but I need help. Jennifer left and took Emma. The mortgage is 3 months behind. I'm going to lose the house if I can't find $8,000 by next month. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Michael. That was it. No real apology. No acknowledgement of what he'd done to me. Just desperation dressed up as regret and a request for money. I sat on my couch, my own couch, in my own apartment, that I'd bought with my own money, and felt something break open in my chest. Not sadness. Rage. The same son who'd handed me $50 and told me I was on my own was now begging for $8,000. The irony was so thick I could taste it. David found me there an hour later, still holding the letter, tears of anger running down my face. What happened? He sat beside me and pulled me into his arms. His hands were warm and steady, anchoring me to the present instead of letting me get pulled back into the past. Read it, I said, handing him the letter. David read it twice, his jaw getting tighter with each word. What a piece of work. He doesn't even say he was wrong to throw me out. Just that it was a mistake. I laughed bitterly. Like accidentally buying the wrong color paint, not destroying his mother's life. David's arms tightened around me. What are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? 6 months ago, I would have found a way to scrape together the money. I would have sacrificed anything to help Michael because that's what mothers do. But the woman sitting in this apartment wasn't the same woman who'd been thrown out in the rain. I don't know, I said honestly. Do you want to know what I think? Tell me. David turned so he could look directly at me. I think your son is a selfish bastard who doesn't deserve your help. But I also think you're going to help him anyway because you're a better person than he is. Would that make me weak? No, David said firmly. But it might make you a fool. That night, David and I made love with an intensity that surprised both of us. Maybe it was the emotional upheaval of the letter, or maybe it was my need to feel connected to someone who actually valued me. His hands were possessive as they moved over my body, claiming me, reminding me that I was desired and treasured. Afterward, lying in his arms with sweat cooling on our skin, I felt something I hadn't expected. Clarity. I'm not going to help him, I said into the darkness. What? Michael. I'm not going to give him the money. David propped himself up on his elbow to look at me. Are you sure? He threw me away when I needed him most. Now he needs me, and he thinks he can just write a letter and I'll come running with my checkbook open. I sat up, suddenly energized by my decision. You know what I'm going to do instead? What? I'm going to buy that house. David stared at me like I'd lost my mind. What? Think about it. He's 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank is going to foreclose. It'll go to auction, and I can probably get it for 60 cents on the dollar. Rose, that's cold. No, I said, getting out of bed and pacing his bedroom. Cold is what Michael did to me. This is business. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't just business. It was justice. Michael had thrown me out of that house thinking I'd never recover, never amount to anything. Now I was going to own the house he couldn't afford to keep. The next morning, I called Maria and asked her to research the property. Within 2 days, she had all the information I needed. It's definitely going to foreclosure, Maria said, sliding the paperwork across her desk. Auction is scheduled for next month. Based on comparable sales, you could probably get it for $70,000, maybe less. I had enough saved for a down payment, and my growing commission checks meant I could qualify for a mortgage. The numbers worked perfectly. But that evening, David confronted me about my motives. "Rose, I'm worried about you," he said over dinner. "This doesn't feel like you." "What doesn't feel like me?" "This revenge fantasy. Buying your son's house to get back at him." I put down my fork and looked at him. Really looked at him. David was worried because he loved me, but he didn't understand what this meant. "David, this isn't about revenge. It's about investment. That house is in a good neighborhood, it's undervalued, and I can either flip it or rent it out. It's a smart business decision. And the fact that it's your son's house? The fact that it's my son's house makes it even better. Because every month when I collect rent from the new tenants, I'll remember that I'm not the helpless woman he threw away. I'm the woman who rebuilt her life so completely that I can afford to buy his mistakes." David was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm proud of you," he said finally. "For what?" "For choosing justice over revenge. There's a difference, and you found it." 3 weeks later, I was standing in the courthouse with a cashier's check for $68,000. The foreclosure auction was crowded with investors, flippers, and desperate homeowners trying to save their properties at the last minute. When they called the address for 412 Sycamore Street, Michael's house, I felt my heart start racing. This was it. The moment that would prove I'd not just survived his betrayal, but transformed it into power. The bidding started at $45,000. A flipper jumped it to $55,000. I raised my paddle, $60,000. 2 more investors bid it up to $66,000. I countered with $68,000. The auctioneer called for higher bids twice. Silence. Sold to bidder number 47 for $68,000. I walked out of that courthouse as the owner of the house my son had thrown me out of. The house I'd helped him buy with Tom's insurance money. The house where he'd handed me $50 and told me I was on my own. David was waiting for me outside, and when he saw my face, he knew. "You got it?" "I got it." He spun me around right there on the courthouse steps, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph. Not revenge. Relief. That's when I saw her, Emma, now 5 years old, playing in the courtyard below. She was with Jennifer's mother, and she looked happy and well cared for, but seeing her felt like a punch to the chest. "Grandma Rose?" Emma's voice was small and uncertain, but she remembered me. Jennifer's mother looked shocked to see me. "Rose? What are you doing here?" "I just bought a house," I said simply. Emma walked over to me shyly. "Mommy said you went away." I knelt down so I could look into her eyes, my granddaughter's eyes, so much like Michael's had been when he was little. "I did go away, sweetheart. But I'm back now. Are you coming home?" The question broke my heart and filled it at the same time. This little girl had been caught in the middle of adult decisions and betrayals, and she still remembered me with love. I picked up the phone to call him, then set it down and made a different call instead. I called a property management company and arranged to have the house cleaned out and prepared for rental. Michael could find out he'd lost his home when the eviction notice arrived. I had more important things to do than hold his hand through the consequences of his choices. Should family always come first, even when they've hurt you? Because I was about to learn that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is let them face the results of their actions alone. 6 months later, I owned 3 rental properties and had my picture on a park bench advertisement. Rose Martinez, the agent who understands your story. Maria had insisted on the advertising campaign after I'd closed 27 sales in 8 months. Not bad for a woman who'd been homeless a year earlier. The photograph showed me in a professional blue suit, standing in front of a "sold" sign, smiling like I owned the world. Which, in a way, I guess I did. Or at least I owned my little corner of it. David's architectural firm had grown too, and we'd started collaborating on flips. I'd find undervalued properties, he'd design the renovations, and we'd split the profits. It was a perfect partnership in business and in bed. Our relationship had deepened into something I'd never experienced before, not even with Tom. With Tom, I'd been a young woman following traditional paths. With David, I was an equal partner building something entirely new. "You realize we're becoming a real estate power couple," David said one evening as we reviewed contracts in his apartment. His place had basically become our headquarters, with property files scattered across every surface. "Is that what we are?" I asked, looking up from the listing I was preparing. "What else would you call two people who are madly in love and making obscene amounts of money together?" He had a point. My commission checks were now bigger than the salary I'd earned as a teacher. David's renovation projects were booking months in advance. We were both thriving individually and as a team. But it was late at night, when the work was done and we were tangled together in his bed, that I felt most alive. David's hands had learned every inch of my body, and he touched me like I was precious and powerful at the same time. When he made love to me, it wasn't just physical. It was worship. A man recognizing a woman's worth and celebrating it with his whole being. "I have something to ask you," he said one night after we'd nearly destroyed his sheets with the intensity of our lovemaking. "What?" I was still catching my breath, my skin humming from his touch. David reached into the nightstand drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart stopped. "Rose Martinez," he said, sitting up and opening the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" The ring was perfect, classic but not traditional, elegant but not flashy. Exactly what I would have chosen for myself. "David," I whispered. "Before you answer, let me say something." He took my hand, the one that had been empty since Tom died. "I'm not asking you to marry me because I want to take care of you. You've proven you can take care of yourself better than anyone I know." He slipped the ring onto my finger, and it fit perfectly. "I'm asking you to marry me because I want to build an empire with you. Business, family, life, everything. I want us to be partners in every way possible." Looking at that ring on my finger, I felt something shift inside me. Not just happiness or love, though I felt both of those things. Power. The power that comes from being chosen by someone who sees your full potential and wants to help you achieve it. "Yes," I said. "Yes, I'll marry you." We made love again then, slower this time, with the weight of commitment making every touch more meaningful. When David moved inside me, I felt like we were sealing something sacred. Not just a promise to love each other, but a promise to build something lasting together. The next morning, Maria took one look at my left hand and started laughing. "About time," she said. "That man's been carrying that ring around for 2 months." I was starting to think he'd lost his nerve. "He told you he was going to propose?" "Honey, he asked my permission to propose. Said he wanted to make sure it wouldn't interfere with your career." Maria shook her head. Like I was going to tell a successful woman she couldn't marry a successful man. The engagement changed something in how clients saw me. I wasn't just Rose the divorced agent who understood starting over. I was Rose the woman who'd rebuilt her entire life so completely that a successful man wanted to marry her. My client list grew even more diverse. Young couples buying their first homes. Families upgrading to bigger houses. Empty nesters downsizing. And increasingly, women going through divorces who needed someone who understood that selling the family home was about more than real estate. But it was my rental properties that really started building wealth. Michael's old house was rented to a young family with 2 kids. The rent covered the mortgage and gave me a couple hundred in profit each month. More importantly, Every time I drove past and saw toys in the yard and laughter coming from the windows, I felt satisfied. That house was being loved again, the way it deserved to be. My second rental was a condo downtown that I'd bought from a bank auction. David had helped me renovate it, and we rented it to a young professional who paid above market rate for the location and upgrades. The third property was a duplex where I lived in one unit and rented out the other. The rental income covered most of my mortgage, so I was basically living for free while building equity. "You're becoming quite the real estate mogul," David said as we reviewed my portfolio over dinner one night. "Is that what I am? What else would you call someone who owns multiple properties and has enough passive income to support herself? Independent. Powerful. Secure." Those were words I'd never associated with myself before this year. David's proposal had made everything feel more real somehow. We weren't just dating or even just living together. We were building a dynasty. But success has a way of attracting attention you don't always want. 3 weeks after our engagement, I was showing a house to potential buyers when my phone rang. Unknown number, but something made me answer it. "Mom?" Michael's voice hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't heard from him since the foreclosure, and hearing him now, in the middle of my successful new life, felt like a violation. "What do you want, Michael?" I stepped away from my clients and walked to the kitchen. "I heard you bought my house." "I bought a house that was being foreclosed on. It happened to be the one you couldn't afford." Silence. Then, "Mom, I need to see you." "No. Please. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I'm trying to make things right." I could hear desperation in his voice, the same desperation that had been in his letter. But I wasn't the same woman who'd received that letter. "Michael, I'm working. I have clients waiting. Mom, please. Just 5 minutes. I'll come to wherever you are." Something in his voice made me hesitate. Not pity, exactly, but curiosity. What could my son possibly have to say after all this time? "Fine. 5 minutes. I'm at 847 Oak Street." 20 minutes later, Michael's beat-up truck pulled into the driveway. I watched from the window as he sat in the cab for a full minute before getting out. When he finally emerged, I was shocked by how much he'd changed. He'd lost weight, too much weight. His clothes hung loose, and his face had the hollow look of someone who'd been living on stress and regret. This wasn't the arrogant man who'd thrown me out. This was someone who'd been broken by consequences. "Mom," he said when I opened the door. 5 minutes, Michael. I have buyers coming back in an hour." He looked around the house, a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial that I was selling for a young executive. Clean, updated, exactly the kind of place he'd probably dreamed of upgrading to someday. "You look good," he said quietly. "Successful." "Thank you. I heard you're engaged." I held up my left hand, letting the diamond catch the light. "David's a good man. He treats me like I matter." Michael flinched like I'd slapped him. "Mom, about what happened?" "What happened is that you threw your mother out of her home with $50 and told her she was on her own. Then you lost that same home because you couldn't manage your own life." "I was scared," he said, his voice cracking. "Jennifer was threatening to leave, Emma was crying all the time, I was working double shifts and still couldn't make ends meet. I thought if I could just..." "You thought if you got rid of me, your problems would disappear?" Michael's shoulders sagged. "I thought you'd be fine. You always seemed so strong, so capable. I thought you'd figure it out." "I did figure it out. Without you." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Respect. Maybe even a little fear. "Mom, I want to make this right." "How?" "I don't know. But I want to try." I studied my son, this man I'd raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally, and felt something unexpected. Not forgiveness, exactly, but not hatred either. Indifference, maybe. Or just clarity? Michael, you can't make this right. What you did changed me permanently. I'm not the same person you threw away, and I never will be again. Is that bad? I thought about the question seriously. No. It's not bad. The woman you threw away was weak, dependent, afraid to take risks. The woman standing here owns multiple properties and runs her own business. She's engaged to a man who adores her and sees her as an equal partner. I walked to the window and looked out at the yard where a tire swing hung from an oak tree. So no, Michael. It's not bad that I changed. But it does mean that the mother you remember, the one who would have given you anything you asked for? She's gone. Michael was quiet for a long moment. What if I said I was proud of you? I'd say it's too little, too late. And I don't need your approval anymore. That was the moment I realized something profound. I didn't hate Michael. I didn't love him either, at least not the way I used to. He'd become irrelevant to my happiness, and that was perhaps the greatest victory of all. Your 5 minutes are up, I said gently. I have work to do. As Michael walked back to his truck, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not because we'd reconciled, we hadn't, but because I'd faced him as an equal and found that he no longer had power over me. That evening, David found me on his balcony, looking out over the city lights. Tough day? He asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. Interesting day. Michael came to see me. David's arms tightened slightly. How do you feel about that? Powerful, I said, leaning back against his chest. For the first time in my life, I looked at my son and realized he can't hurt me anymore. He threw away someone who would have done anything for him, and now he gets to live with that choice. David turned me around to face him. And you get to live with your choices too. Which are? Choosing to rebuild instead of staying broken. Choosing success over victimhood. Choosing me over the past. He kissed me then, deep and claiming, and I felt that familiar fire in my belly. We made love that night with the city lights twinkling below us, two successful people celebrating their power and their partnership. The property I was about to buy had a familiar address. But this time, it wasn't about the past. It was about the future David and I were building together, a penthouse downtown that would be our home base as we expanded our real estate empire. When have you had to risk everything to move forward? Because I was about to learn that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the most beautiful rewards. The investment property I was about to buy had the most familiar address of all, the apartment complex where Michael lived. I'd been tracking the property for months through my real estate connections. The owner was an elderly man whose health was failing, and his children wanted to cash out rather than manage rental properties. 48 units, decent condition, solid rental history. The asking price was $1.2 million. It was the biggest deal I'd ever considered, and it would require everything I'd saved plus a substantial loan. But the numbers worked, and more importantly, the location was perfect. Downtown Dallas, walking distance to restaurants and shops, the kind of place young professionals loved. The fact that Michael lived in Unit 23B was just a bonus. You're sure about this? David asked as we walked through the property with the sellers. It's a big step up from single-family rentals. I'm sure, I said, examining the books the current owner had provided. Occupancy rate of 95%, minimal maintenance issues, waiting list of potential tenants. But David knew me well enough to sense there was more to this decision. That evening, over dinner at our favorite restaurant, he confronted me directly. This is about Michael, isn't it? Partly, I admitted. But it's also about the investment. This property will generate $15,000 a month in rental income after expenses. And the fact that your son lives there? I set down my wine glass and looked at David. The fact that my son lives there means he'll be paying me rent every month. He'll be my tenant. Do you understand the poetry in that? David was quiet for a moment. Rose, I love your strength. I love how you've rebuilt your life. But I'm worried that this is about revenge, not business. Can't it be both? It can. But I need to know that you're making this decision with your head, not just your emotions. I reached across the table and took his hand. The engagement ring caught the candlelight, reminding me of everything I'd built, everything I had to protect. David, a year ago I was homeless. Tonight, I'm considering buying a building worth over $1 million. That's not revenge, that's transformation. And Michael? Michael made his choice when he threw me out. Now he gets to live with the consequences of that choice. Literally. David squeezed my hand. Then let's buy a building. The financing took 3 weeks to arrange. My credit score had improved dramatically with my successful business, and the bank was eager to lend to someone with my track record. Still, it was nerve-wracking putting everything I'd worked for on the line. The closing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. David took the day off to be there with me, and Maria came along as my agent. Walking into that title company office, I felt like I was about to make history. Personal history, at least. This is it, Maria said as we reviewed the final paperwork. After this signature, you'll be a property management company owner. I signed my name on document after document, each signature representing another step away from the woman Michael had discarded. When I signed the final deed, transferring ownership of 48 apartments to me, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete financial independence. I walked out of that office as the landlord of a building worth $1.2 million. The mortgage payments would be covered by rent, and after expenses, I'd have enough passive income to support myself comfortably even if I never sold another house. But more than the money, I had power. Real, tangible power over my own life and, in a small way, over the life of the son who'd thrown me away. David took me home, to his place, which had become our place. And we celebrated in the most primal way possible. He made love to me like I was a queen, worshipping my body with his hands and mouth until I was shaking with pleasure and power. You did it, he whispered against my neck as I came down from the intensity. You actually did it. We did it, I corrected, pulling him up to kiss me. This is our empire now. 3 weeks later, the eviction notice arrived at Michael's door. I hadn't planned it that way. The previous owner had already started eviction proceedings because Michael was 2 months behind on rent. I was simply following through on legal action that was already in progress. But the timing felt like destiny. I was in my new office. I'd rented space in the same building where Maria worked, when my property manager called. Mrs. Martinez, we have a situation with Unit 23B. The tenant is requesting a meeting with you directly. Says he's family. Set up the meeting, I said calmly. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock. That night, David found me staring out at the city lights, thinking about the conversation I was about to have. You don't have to see him, David said, wrapping his arms around me. You could have the property manager handle everything. No, I said. I want to see him. I want to look into his eyes when he realizes that the homeless woman he threw away is now his landlord. And then what? And then I'll decide if he gets to stay or if he has to find somewhere else to live. David was quiet for a moment. What's going to make that decision for you? Whether he's learned anything from losing everything, or whether he's still the same selfish man who destroyed his mother's life to make his own easier. The next afternoon, Michael walked into my office looking like a man who'd seen a ghost. He stared around at the professional furniture, the framed photos of properties I'd sold, the awards from the real estate board. This is your office? He asked. This is my office. In my building. Where you live. Michael sank into the chair across from my desk. Mom, I can't afford the rent increase. There is no rent increase. You're being evicted because you haven't paid your current rent. I lost my job at the plant. I'm looking for work, but you haven't paid rent in 2 months, and you haven't communicated with the property management company about your situation. Michael looked smaller somehow, diminished. I was hoping I'd find something before it became a problem. I studied my son across my professional desk, in my professional office, in my professional building. This man who'd once had the power to destroy my world was now begging me for mercy. Michael, I said quietly, do you remember what you said when you threw me out? Mom. You said my problems weren't your problem anymore. Do you remember that? Michael's face crumpled. Yes. Good. Because your problems aren't my problem anymore either. The silence in that office was profound. Outside, I could hear the sounds of a city full of people working, building, striving. Inside, a son was learning that actions have consequences. Are you going to evict me? He asked finally. I looked at this man I'd raised, this person who'd caused me so much pain and, indirectly, so much growth. I thought about the woman I'd been when he threw me out, frightened, dependent, powerless. And I thought about the woman I'd become, successful, independent, strong. That's when I saw her, Emma, now 5 years old, playing in the courtyard below my office window. Michael followed my gaze and saw her too. She's with Jennifer's mother today. Jennifer has a job interview. Watching my granddaughter play, remembering how much I'd missed of her life, I felt my resolve waver slightly. Does Emma know you live here? I asked. She knows. She asks about you sometimes. What do you tell her? That Grandma Rose had to go away, but that she loves her very much. Looking at Emma through that window, I realized that this decision wasn't just about Michael and me. It was about a little girl who'd already been through enough upheaval, who needed stability even if her father hadn't provided it. 3 weeks later, the eviction notice arrived at Michael's door. But so did something else, a new lease agreement with modified terms and a payment plan for the back rent. What would you do if someone who destroyed you came begging for help? Because I was about to learn that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show mercy from a position of strength. Owning the building where Michael lived changed everything about our relationship, and I wasn't sure how I felt about that. For the first time in my adult life, I had complete power over my son's living situation. He paid rent to my property management company. He followed rules I'd helped establish. He lived in a space I owned, under conditions I controlled. It was intoxicating and uncomfortable at the same time. David noticed the change in me almost immediately. You've been different since you bought the building, he said one evening as we reviewed rental reports together. His architectural firm had been hired to design improvements for several of my units, so our personal and professional lives had become even more intertwined. Different how? More commanding. Authoritative. Like you've finally realized how much power you actually have. He wasn't wrong. Owning 48 rental units had changed how I moved through the world. Tenants called me Mrs. Martinez, with respect. Other property owners sought my advice. Bank loan officers returned my calls immediately. But it was the power dynamic with Michael that affected me most. He'd started stopping by my office once a month to drop off his rent check personally instead of mailing it to the property management company. These visits were awkward, formal affairs where we spoke like distant acquaintances instead of mother and son. Rent for Unit 23B, he'd say, placing the check on my desk. Thank you. Any maintenance issues? No, ma'am. Everything's fine. Ma'am. My own son called me ma'am now, like I was a stranger he needed to show respect to. Part of me enjoyed it. Part of me hated it. It was during one of these visits that everything changed. Mom, Michael said after placing his check on the desk. I mean, Mrs. Martinez. Sorry. It's fine, Michael. What do you need? I wanted to thank you. That caught me off guard. For what? For not throwing me out. For giving me the payment plan. For. He struggled with the words. For being better to me than I was to you. I set down my pen and really looked at him. Michael had been working construction since losing his plant job, and the physical labor had changed him. He was leaner, more muscled, but also more tired. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. You're welcome, I said simply. Can I ask you something? What? When you bought this building, did you know I lived here? I could have lied. Should have lied, probably. But sitting across from this man I'd raised, in my office, in my building, I decided on honesty. Yes, I knew. Michael nodded like he'd expected that answer. Were you hoping to get revenge on me? Partly, I admitted. But mostly I was hoping to get power over my own life. The fact that you happened to be part of that life was complicated. And now? How do you feel about having power over me? I thought about that question seriously. How did I feel about being able to control whether my son had a place to live? Responsible, I said finally. Which is ironic, since you threw me out to avoid feeling responsible for me. Michael flinched. Mom, about that night. Don't. We've been over this. You made your choice, I survived it, and now we're both living with the consequences. But I want to explain. Michael. I stood up, using my height advantage to establish dominance. I don't need your explanations. I don't need your apologies. What I need is for you to pay your rent on time and follow the building rules. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am. There it was again. That formal respect that reminded both of us who held the power now. After he left, I sat in my office feeling something I couldn't identify. Not satisfaction, exactly. Not guilt either. Something more complex. That evening, David found me on his balcony, staring out at the city lights. Rough day with tenants, he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. Complicated day with family, I corrected. David's hands began massaging my shoulders, working out tension I hadn't realized I was carrying. His touch was firm, possessive, reminding me that I had someone in my life who valued me completely. Want to talk about it? Michael came by the office. He thanked me for not evicting him. That must have felt good. It felt weird. Like he was thanking a stranger for kindness instead of asking his mother for forgiveness. David turned me around to face him. Rose, you know you can't have both, right? Both what? You can't be his landlord and his mother at the same time. Power relationships don't work that way. He was right, and I knew it. By becoming Michael's landlord, I'd fundamentally altered our relationship. We could never go back to being simply mother and son, not when one of us controlled the other's housing. Michael's face crumpled. I know. God, I know how bad that sounds. But she kept asking where Grandma went, and Jessica said it would be easier if she just thought you were in heaven with Grandpa. Easier for who? For everyone. Michael's voice rose, then he looked around nervously and lowered it again. Do you know what it's like trying to explain to a 2-year-old why her grandmother disappeared? Why Mommy and Daddy fight about her all the time? I stepped closer to him, and he actually took a step back. Good. Let him be afraid. Do you know what it's like sleeping in a shelter, wondering if the person next to you is going to rob you in your sleep? Do you know what it's like having $50 to your name and trying to figure out if you should buy food or soap? Mom. Do you know what it's like being 62 years old and having to start completely over because your own son decided you were disposable? Michael started crying then. Big, ugly sobs that shook his whole body. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I think about that night every single day. Not sorry enough to call. Not sorry enough to check if I was even alive. I tried. I went to the address you gave me, but you'd moved. I called the number, but it was disconnected. I thought maybe you were better off without us. Or maybe you were better off without me. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve, leaving streaks on his face. We weren't. Nothing's been right since that night. Jessica left me 2 years ago. She took the kids, Emma and the baby you never got to meet. I see them on weekends if I'm lucky. Kids. Plural. I had another grandchild I'd never met. I started gambling, Michael continued. Just poker games at first, then the casino. I thought I could win enough to get my family back, you know? Buy a better house, prove I could take care of them. Let me guess. You lost. Everything. The house Dad left us is in foreclosure. I owe money to people who don't take IOUs. And now I'm about to lose my apartment too. That's when I realized he still didn't know. Somehow, in all his desperation and self-pity, Michael hadn't figured out that the eviction notice he'd received came from his own mother. How much do you owe? I asked. Rent? $1,500. But the other debts? He shook his head. 20 grand, maybe more. These aren't the kind of people who negotiate payment plans. I walked back into the penthouse, leaving him standing in the doorway. When I returned, I was holding something that made his eyes widen. A $50 bill. You gave me this once, I said, holding it up. Told me I was on my own. Said I was done. Michael stared at the money like it might bite him. Mom, what are you? I want you to take it. I need more than $50. You need to remember what it feels like to have nothing. I pressed the bill into his palm, closing his fingers around it. You need to remember what you did to me. I remember. I remember every day. Do you? Because you just spent 10 minutes explaining why throwing me out was justified. How I was the problem, how everyone was better off without me. Michael looked down at the money in his hand, and something in his face changed. This is it, isn't it? This is what you've been waiting for. Your chance to get back at me. Michael, I said softly, you have no idea what I'm capable of. That's when David's voice came from behind me. Sarah? Is everything okay? He must have used his key, come back to apologize. But seeing Michael in our doorway, seeing the $50 bill, he understood immediately what was happening. Michael looked between us, confusion replacing desperation. Who's this? Someone who was there when you weren't, I said. David moved beside me, his presence solid and reassuring despite our fight earlier. You should leave, he told Michael. Mom, please. Emma asks about you sometimes. She doesn't remember much, but she has dreams about a grandma who used to sing to her. If you help me, I can bring her to see you. We can be a family again. Using Emma against me. Even desperate, even broken, Michael was still trying to manipulate the situation to his advantage. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and realized that the boy I'd raised, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, was exactly who he'd always been. Selfish. Weak. Willing to hurt the people who loved him if it meant getting what he wanted. But I wasn't the same woman he'd thrown away. The person standing in this penthouse, wearing designer clothes and holding all the cards, was someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who had choices. Tomorrow morning, I said finally, come to my office. We'll discuss your options. Michael's face lit up with hope. Thank you. Mom, thank you so much. Don't thank me yet, I interrupted. You might not like what I have to offer. After he left, David and I stood in the silence of my penthouse, both of us understanding that everything was about to change. What are you going to do? He asked. I looked out at the city lights, at the building below where Emma was sleeping, where Michael was probably pacing and planning what to say to convince me to save him. I'm going to finish what he started. Michael arrived at my office the next morning looking like he'd spent the night awake and pacing. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, but there was hope in his face that made my stomach turn. He still thought his mother was going to save him. Thanks for seeing me, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk like a job applicant. Which, in a way, he was. Coffee? I offered, playing the gracious host. Sure. Black, no sugar. You remember. I remembered everything. That was the problem. While I prepared his coffee, I watched him take in my office. The mahogany desk, the framed photos of properties I'd sold, the view of the city that had once seemed impossible from a homeless shelter. His eyes lingered on a photo of David and me at a charity gala, both of us smiling and looking successful. You've done well for yourself, he said, accepting the cup. I always knew you were smart. Dad used to say you could sell ice to an Eskimo. Your father said a lot of things. Michael sipped his coffee and winced. Still make it strong enough to wake the dead. Some things don't change. But others do. Like the woman sitting across from him wasn't the broken, grieving mother he'd discarded 5 years ago. She was someone who owned buildings, who made decisions about people's lives, who had power. So, Michael said, setting down his cup, about what we discussed last night. Before we get to that, I interrupted, I need to show you something. I turned my computer screen toward him and pulled up the property management software. Michael squinted at the screen, trying to make sense of the columns and numbers. What am I looking at? Your building. My building, actually. I bought it 6 months ago. The color drained from Michael's face. What? Unit 4B. That's yours, right? 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, facing the courtyard where Emma plays. You own my building? I own your building. I own your debt. I own your eviction notice. I leaned back in my chair, watching him process this information. The landlord you've been cursing for 6 months? That's me. Michael stared at the screen like it was written in a foreign language. This is impossible. Is it? You threw me out with $50. I turned that into a real estate license. The license became sales commissions. The commissions became investment capital. The investments became properties. And one of those properties happened to house my ungrateful son. You've been watching me. I've been managing my investment. The fact that you live there is just, what's the word? Irony. Michael stood up, pacing to the window and back. So what, this is your revenge? You buy my building so you can throw me out? I don't need revenge, Michael. Revenge is what weak people do when they can't move forward. I moved forward. I built something. Then why are you telling me this? I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the eviction notice with his name on it. His eyes fixed on it like a snake watching a mouse. Because you have a choice to make. The door to my office opened, and David walked in. He nodded to Michael, then came to stand beside my chair, his hand resting on my shoulder in a gesture of support and unity. This is David, I said. My partner in business and life. David, this is Michael. David extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Michael shook it. I've heard a lot about you, David said. I bet you have. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. 3 adults, each representing a different chapter of my life, all converging on this moment that would determine what came next. As I was saying, I continued, you have a choice. Option 1, I proceed with the eviction. You're out in 30 days, and you deal with your gambling debts however you can. Michael's hands clenched into fists. And option 2? You sign over custody of your visitation rights with Emma. The words hung in the air like smoke. Michael stared at me, his mouth opening and closing without sound. You can't be serious. I want to see my granddaughter. You want to keep your apartment. Seems like a fair trade. Emma is my daughter. Emma is a little girl who thinks her grandmother is dead because you found that more convenient than explaining why you threw me away. David squeezed my shoulder, a reminder to stay calm. But inside, I felt like a predator circling wounded prey. You can't use her as leverage, Michael said. She's just a child. So was I, once upon a time, when my own father walked out. So were you, when your father died and left me to raise you alone while working 2 jobs. Children get used as leverage all the time, Michael. The difference is, I actually love Emma. I love her too. Do you? Because love means putting someone else's needs before your own. Love means sacrifice. Love means showing up even when it's hard. I stood up, moving around the desk to face him directly. When have you ever done that for anyone? Michael's face went red. I sacrificed for you. I took care of you after Dad died. You let me live in my own house and help raise your daughter until grief made me inconvenient. That's not sacrifice. That's convenience. Fine. Michael's voice cracked. Fine, you want to see Emma? I'll bring her by sometime. Not sometime. Every weekend. Alternate holidays. Summer vacation. And I want it legal. You want me to sign away my parental rights? I want you to share custody with someone who can provide for her. Someone who can give her opportunities you can't afford. Michael looked between David and me, understanding finally dawning in his eyes. This was always the plan, wasn't it? You bought my building, you tracked down where I live, you waited for me to come crawling back so you could take my daughter. Your daughter came to me first, actually. Asked if we could be friends. Children have good instincts about people. That broke something in Michael. He sat down hard, put his head in his hands, and sobbed like a child himself. I can't lose her too. She's all I have left. You lost her the day you told her I was dead. I'm offering you a chance to be part of her life while someone who actually loves her takes responsibility for her future. David handed Michael a tissue box. Even in his anger, David understood that watching a man lose everything was hard to watch. What if I say no? Michael asked through his tears. I walked to the window, looking down at the courtyard where Emma would be playing in a few hours. Then you'll be out on the street in 30 days, the people you owe money to will find you eventually, and Emma will wonder why Daddy disappeared just like Grandma did. Michael was quiet for a long time. Outside, the city hummed with life, people making choices and living with consequences. If I agree, he said finally, what happens to my debts? I pay them. All of them. You get a fresh start. And my apartment? You can stay as long as you want. Rent-free. Michael looked up at me with swollen eyes. Why would you do that? Because despite everything, you're still my son. And because Emma deserves to know her father, even if he's an idiot. The laugh that escaped him was half sob, half relief. I really screwed up, didn't I? Yes. But everyone deserves a second chance. Even if some people have to lose everything to earn it. 6 months later, I stood in my penthouse kitchen, making Emma's favorite pancakes while she sat at the counter, swinging her legs and chattering about her upcoming ballet recital. And then I do a pirouette, that's a spin, Grandma, and Jessica says I'm getting really good at it. Daddy's going to come watch, right? He promised he would, I said, flipping a pancake that looked suspiciously like Texas. And your grandmother always keeps her promises too. Emma giggled. You're silly. You can't promise for Daddy. Watch me. The truth was, Michael had been different since our agreement. Not perfect, he still struggled with his impulses, still made questionable decisions, but he was trying. The gambling had stopped, mostly because I'd put him on a strict allowance and taken control of his finances. The drinking had slowed to an occasional beer with dinner. And his relationship with Emma had deepened now that desperation wasn't clouding his judgment. Grandma Sarah, Emma said, using the name she'd chosen for me after learning I wasn't actually dead, can I ask you something? Always. Why did Daddy tell me you were in heaven? This was the question I'd been dreading and expecting in equal measure. Emma was 6 now, old enough to understand that adults sometimes lied, young enough to be hurt by it. I sat down beside her at the counter, choosing my words carefully. Your daddy was scared and sad, and sometimes when people are scared and sad, they make choices they shouldn't make. Like when I told Mrs. Peterson that Max ate my homework, but really I forgot to do it? Exactly like that. You weren't trying to be mean to Max, you were just trying to avoid getting in trouble. Emma nodded solemnly. But I felt bad about it after. How do you think your daddy feels about what he did? Really bad. He cries sometimes when he thinks I'm not looking. The pancakes were ready, but neither of us was paying attention to food anymore. These conversations, honest, necessary, painful, happened regularly now. Emma was smart enough to sense the complicated history between her father and me, but young enough to accept that adults sometimes needed time to fix their mistakes. "Can I tell you a secret?" I asked. Emma's eyes lit up. She loved secrets. "When I was your age, I thought my daddy was the strongest, smartest, best person in the whole world. But you know what I learned when I got older? That he was just a person. Just a regular person who sometimes did good things and sometimes did not so good things. And that was okay, because I could love him anyway. Even when he did not so good things. Even then. Love doesn't mean someone is perfect. It means you choose to care about them even when they mess up." Emma considered this while drowning her pancakes in syrup. "Do you love Daddy even though he did a not-so-good thing?" "Yes. And he loves me too, even though I sometimes do not-so-good things. Like when you wouldn't let him eat ice cream for breakfast last week?" I laughed. Exactly like that. The elevator chimed, announcing David's arrival. He'd moved back in gradually, after Emma started spending weekends with us. The adjustment hadn't been easy. David wasn't used to children, and Emma wasn't used to sharing my attention, but they'd found their rhythm. "Morning, ladies," David said, kissing my cheek and ruffling Emma's hair. "How are my two favorite women?" "Grandma Sarah was telling me about love," Emma announced through a mouthful of pancakes. "Was she? And what did you learn?" "That people don't have to be perfect to be loved. And that sometimes adults make mistakes because they're scared." David met my eyes over Emma's head, understanding passing between us. We'd had our own conversations about fear, about the choices we make when we're terrified of losing what matters most. "Very wise," David said. "Your grandmother is a smart woman." "The smartest." Emma agreed. "She owns buildings and everything." After breakfast, David took Emma to the courtyard to play while I cleaned up. Through the window, I watched them on the swings, Emma's laughter floating up to my penthouse like music. David was pushing her higher and higher, both of them grinning. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael, "Running late but we'll be there for dinner. Emma's favorite movie ready?" I smiled, typing back, "Moana is queued up and ready. Try not to cry during How Far I'll Go this time. No promises. That song gets me every time." The Michael who texted me now was different from the desperate man who'd knocked on my door 6 months ago. He was learning to be vulnerable without being pitiful, to accept help without losing his dignity. The custody arrangement had become less about legal requirements and more about what worked best for Emma. Some weeks she stayed with him, some weeks with me, and most weeks she spent time with both of us. Jessica had even started bringing my grandson, 4-year-old Tyler, around occasionally. Another grandchild I was getting to know, another relationship to build from scratch. The real estate business was thriving. I'd bought 3 more buildings in the past 6 months, but now I ran them differently. Instead of just collecting rent, I'd started programs to help struggling tenants. Job placement assistance, financial counseling, childcare resources. Mrs. Chin from my first building had become my community coordinator, helping other families navigate tough times without losing their homes. "You're getting soft," Maria had teased me last week. "I'm getting smart," I'd corrected her. Happy tenants stay longer, take better care of properties, and refer their friends. It's good business wrapped in doing good. But the truth was simpler than business strategy. I remembered what it felt like to be desperate, to have nowhere to turn, to need someone to believe I was worth saving. Now I was in a position to be that person for others. That afternoon, while Emma napped on my couch and David worked in his study, I found myself back at the window overlooking the courtyard. Not searching for anyone this time, just watching. Families playing together, children chasing balls, teenagers pretending they were too cool for playground games while secretly wanting to join in. This view used to represent power. Looking down from my penthouse at the people whose lives I controlled. Now it represented something different. Community. Connection. The understanding that we're all just people trying to get by, trying to protect the ones we love, trying to build something meaningful out of whatever chances we get. My phone rang. The caller ID made me smile. Hi, Rosa. My old friend from the shelter had tracked me down 6 months ago through a mutual acquaintance. She was doing well, had gotten clean, found steady work, reconnected with her own daughter. We met for coffee once a month, two women who'd climbed out of the same hole through different paths. Girl, you'll never guess what happened, Rosa said without preamble. Remember Tommy, that young guy who used to sleep near the back door? The one with all the tattoos? The one who was always reading? That's him. He just graduated from community college. Dean's List and everything. He's starting at the university in the fall, wants to be a social worker. That's amazing. He asked me to tell you thank you. For what? I barely knew him. For showing him that it was possible. He said seeing you go from counting $50 bills to owning buildings proved that rock bottom wasn't permanent. After Rosa hung up, I sat with that for a while. The idea that my story, my pain and struggle and eventual success, could inspire someone else to keep fighting. It made the whole journey feel different, like it had meaning beyond my own survival. Emma stirred on the couch, opening sleepy eyes and looking around in confusion before remembering where she was. Grandma Sarah? Is it dinner time yet? Soon, sweetheart. Your daddy will be here in an hour. She stretched like a cat and padded over to the window where I was sitting. Without invitation, she climbed into my lap, something that still amazed me every time it happened. This easy affection, this absolute trust from a child who had every reason to be wary of adults who disappeared. Grandma Sarah? Yes, baby. I'm glad you're not really in heaven. I hugged her closer, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and childhood innocence. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. Because if you were in heaven, who would make me Texas-shaped pancakes? Probably nobody. And who would let me stay up late to watch movies with Daddy? Definitely nobody. She giggled and snuggled deeper into my arms. And who would buy me books and read them with me and teach me about business? Well, I said, thinking about it seriously, maybe someone else could do those things. But they wouldn't be me. Exactly. And I need you to be you. Out of the mouths of babes. That evening, we had our usual Sunday dinner, Michael, Emma, David, and me around the dining room table that had once felt too big for just two people. Michael had brought Tyler this time, and Jessica too, though she still maintained some distance. Healing takes time, and trust, once broken, requires careful rebuilding. So, Michael said over dessert, I have news. Good news or bad news? Emma asked. Good news. Great news, actually. Michael looked nervous but excited. I got a job. A real job, not just part-time stuff. Construction foreman for a company that's building affordable housing. Michael, that's wonderful. I meant it. He'd been interviewing for weeks, determined to contribute more than just showing up for custody visits. The pay's good, and there are benefits. Health insurance, retirement savings, the whole thing. He looked at me directly. I want to start paying rent again. And paying you back for covering my debts. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Not because you're demanding it, but because I need to. For me. I understood. Pride isn't always a destructive thing. Sometimes it's what motivates us to become better than we were. David raised his wine glass. To new beginnings and second chances. To family, Michael added, his voice thick with emotion. To Texas-shaped pancakes. Emma chimed in, making everyone laugh. To the woman who rose, I said quietly. Later, after Michael had taken Emma home and David had gone to bed, I stood on my balcony looking out at the city that had once seemed impossible to conquer. The lights stretched out like a constellation, each one representing someone's life, someone's dreams, someone's struggles. I thought about the woman who'd stepped into that rainy night 5 years ago with $50 and a broken heart. She'd been afraid, devastated, convinced her story was over. She had no way of knowing that the ending was actually a beginning, that being thrown away would teach her to build herself up stronger than before. That woman was still part of me, but she wasn't all of me anymore. I'd become someone who could hold multiple truths at once, that my son had hurt me deeply and that I loved him anyway. That I deserved better than what I'd been given and that forgiveness was still possible. That strength didn't mean never falling down, it meant getting back up and helping others do the same. The city hummed below me, full of people starting over, falling apart, falling in love, falling back together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to choose grace over revenge, hope over bitterness. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Thank you for dinner, Grandma Sarah. Sweet dreams. Love you to the moon and back." I smiled, typing back, "Love you to the moon, around the stars, and home again." Because that's what love does. It finds its way home, even when the journey takes longer than expected, even when the path leads through darkness, even when you have to rebuild the home from scratch. They say you can't go home again. But sometimes, if you're brave enough and stubborn enough and lucky enough, you can build something better than home. You can build a legacy. And sometimes, that legacy fits perfectly in your lap during Sunday afternoon naps, calls you Grandma Sarah, and believes you make the best pancakes in Texas. That's when you know you didn't just survive the storm. You learned how to dance in it. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this story of comeback and redemption inspired you. Sometimes the best revenge is building a life so beautiful that the past can't touch it.